back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guide to all things Westerosi, and we're here to bring you a review, analysis, and fan v fan debate on each episode of HBO's Game of Thrones successor series, House of the Dragon. In today's discussion, we'll provide our initial review of House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 9, titled The Green Council, before providing a breakdown of the story and a recap of each scene. And then we'll close out the show by speculating what we think might happen next and this week's winner, loser, and wild card player. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and I am so excited to introduce my new co-host of the show. He is actually Daniel Stoll's twin brother, Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
Oh, wait, you're not Daniel, you're Daniel. I know you look and sound the same, but you're different, right? I'm not talking.
Yeah. I'm the version of Daniel that actually has some negative things to say this week.
Are we on the darkest timeline right now? Is that why you have an eye patch too?
Yeah, that is exactly why.
Oh shit!
You've discovered my secret.
Wow. So have I been talking to Daniel or Daniel the whole season?
Oh, you've been talking to Daniel the whole time, but I just came in because Daniel actually didn't know what to do when he had some mixed feelings after the episode, so that's why I had to come on.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad that you cleared that up, that confusion. I will never in any way be confused by twins. I'd like to welcome my other co-host, the actual co-host of today's episode, Daniel Stoll from the Riverlands of Southern Illinois. Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Daniel Stoll. Excited to actually talk about this episode, but I must say earlier this season, I sort of called out Kristen Cole as being sort of an incel. And I got to give props to, House of the Dragon, because now we have Lara Strong as the simp. And I feel like we're really trying to represent, the modern online community in this show. Happy to see that. Everyone's getting represented.
I'm so glad that the new showrunners and writers actually read. They apparently were on Twitter a lot and took all that feedback to heart by making incels the bad slimy guys.
Yeah.
Well, I am super excited to welcome this week's special guest host, first-time guest host on the Cast Beyond the Wall, Adam Kemp, who is the Oklahoma community correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Adam of House Kemp, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
I have one very important question before we can really continue. And if you answer incorrectly, this might be the end of the conversation.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. Have you read Fire and Blood?
I have, miraculously so. I've read the histories of Westeros here, so let's do this.
Thank God. Okay, Daniel, I think this guy's good. He passes the test. No, Adam, in all seriousness, really glad to have you on the show. I think there's only been one other person who's been on as a guest this season who has read the whole novel. So I'm really excited to see what sorts of insights you might be able to glean without also simultaneously not spoiling.
No spoilers here. So
Absolutely
no
not.
spoilers, no kink shaming. That's my rules for this episode, I think. So.
Daniel, did you hear that? No kink shaming.
Yep, absolutely. I'm on board with that.
Well, Adam, firstly, we had a mutual friend, shout out Nathan Poppy, who referred you and recommended you for the show because he said you were a huge fan of all things Westerosi. And I was like, huge fan of all things Westerosi? That's literally in the intro of every one of these podcasts. So I would love to get your take. What have you thought about House of the Dragon so far this season?
Honestly, I came in super tepid. I was not going to throw myself into another Game of Thrones show after a less than spectacular season 8 of Game of Thrones itself. And I've been blown away, to be totally honest. I was nervous because I've read these books. The Fire and Blood book itself is a history, but it's also not a complete history, not a full telling. There's not a lot of dialogue. It is a lot of lines here and there about, like huge scenes that we've already seen are just one line in the book sometimes. It's just like they are filling in these gaps of the Westeros history and the Targaryen history. And it's been super fun to see so far.
That's great to hear. Listen, I think we all shared that, and I don't want to repeat myself too much for the sake of the listeners, but we were not even sure if we were going to do this podcast. Well, I mean, that was how on the line it was. I
seriously had a 3-episode test. And I was like, I'm going to give it the first 3 episodes. And if it's not what I'm wanting, I'm going to back out because I just don't want to get into that kind of commitment again. But I was pretty sold even after episode 1.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Same. I think by episode 4 was when I was like, all right, I think I am comfortable saying that I enjoy talking about the show still.
Yes,
so
exactly.
that's good to hear. sidebar, a little bit of a curveball, not Westerosi, but I'm curious. Have you been watching Rings of Power?
I have. I have not watched the finale yet, though, so no spoilers there either.
No.
I am also pretty in love with it. I love my two different worlds of fantasy here. I like the dirty nastiness of Game of Thrones and the, kind of the good-natured George R. or the good Tolkien-esque world of Rings of Power. So I can do both. I think people want to try and compare them, which I think is super weird, but I think they are best left to be their own things. So
I'm interested in comparing them not as head-on, like it's not apples to apples. I'm interested in seeing how the thing I've been interested in watching is how people react to them differently, and seeing, like, I'm a nerd for like ratings and box office and stuff like that. Just seeing like how many people.
I've been interested in that too.
But like in terms of the actual in narrative story, they really are cutting out two different paths. And I have had my frustrations with Rings of Power. However, will not spoil it, but having seen the finale, I feel really good about my investment in the 8 episodes.
Yep.
Again, criticism notwithstanding, still looking forward to season 2. So,
sure, yeah. I know there's big things on the horizon there too. So.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for chiming in there. But we're going to focus back on the Westerosi conversation. But first, listeners, want to remind you of a few important things. First up, you can track all of our posts here on the Cast Beyond the Wall on our social media channels, including our Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT, or you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/cast beyond the wall. And by the way, if you haven't already, please make sure to rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It is the best way to help us get discovered by more listeners like you. In fact, I'm going to read a review we got from a couple. We actually got some listener feedback I'm excited to talk about here in a few minutes. And lastly, as Adam alluded to a moment ago, we are not going to be spoiling any future events of House of the Dragon. So even though Adam has knowledge of what's to come, Daniel and I have less knowledge. We're not really going to talk about things that are happening next week. At most, we may talk lightly about the next time on, maybe. But with that said, let's talk about some listener feedback. I have an email that came in this week from Jamie of House Russell. So Jamie Russell sent us an email. It's very pertinent to this episode, and I think we can talk about it a little bit on the front, and it relates to Helaena Targaryen. So he says, so I know that you mentioned Helaena Targaryen a few episodes back and basically how she is strange and likes bugs. However, on a recent rewatch of past episodes, I noticed in episode 6 when Aemond is talking about wanting a dragon, Helaena is playing with her bugs and mumbles he'll have to close one eye. Obviously, the next episode he loses his eye and gains the dragon. Then, this last episode, he's referring to episode 8, you may remember when they are at dinner right before she gets up, she in toast, she says, "Beware the beast beneath the boards," which again we'll get to here in a moment. And he says it will be curious to see what truth brings in the next episodes. Also, her character could be a sleeper character with premonition type abilities. I see her as a cross between Bran Stark and Luna Lovegood. Good comparison. And he awarded her his wild card pick from last week's episode. So Jamie, fingers on the pulse. You saw what the writers were up to. You saw that plant. And, I had caught on to the fact that what she was saying had meant something, but I honestly wasn't tracking. So from what I have read, she appears to have one of the Targaryen traits of the dreamer, which is much like Viserys is a guy who puts a lot of stock in visions and dreams of the future. So she seems to have that sort of sensibility about her. And obviously, we see the beast with beneath the boards this episode pay off in some major, major ways. So, Daniel, I'm going to start with you. Have we underestimated Helaena? And what do you think about how her visions have come true so far this season?
I mean, I think I've definitely underestimated her. I did not catch this either, in the mentioning of the losing of the eye. And then as we know, I've seen this episode, beware the beast beneath the boards. We know it towards the end of this episode 9, what happens with Rhaenys. So I definitely did have underestimated her, did not catch that at all. So thank you for pointing that out. That's awesome. And yeah, I definitely would see, I didn't get the prophetic vibes from Viserys as much, but if that, this seems like that's the type of character that she might be, this sort of able to sort of sense the future in some ways or things like that. So I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on her as we move forward for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I think Man, really subtle slip in. I didn't catch the first prophecy with the lack of the eye, but I did catch the Beast Beneath the Boards last episode and was like, huh, I wonder what that means. And then she said it again at the beginning of this episode. We'll get to it. But I was like, huh, I bet this is going to pay off somehow. So, Adam, I want to turn it to you. Is there anything you can share with us about Helaena, or is this like a show invention? Is it alluded to?
It is definitely alluded to in the books. Never outright said, but they do go through the paces of just overall her demeanor and the way they describe her in the book. Make her sound a bit odd, make her sound a bit different-minded than the rest of the Targaryens, not really interested at all in the goings-on of the realm, has her 2 children, loves them, takes care of them, and basically doesn't have anything to do with Aegon, her husband and brother.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because another thing and I actually am going to throw some shade at the show. I did not think it was super clear that Helaena and Aegon had gotten married in that time jump period. Yeah. I did not realize it until listening to another Game of Thrones podcast where they were talking about, based off of book knowledge, they're like, are they married now? And they're like, yeah, I guess so. You just knew this was coming.
I think they set it up, in the funeral scene where Aemon's talking to Aegon. He was like, that's going to be your future wife. They probably needed to have some more to it than that. Maybe like I don't know. Game of Thrones as a whole, and so far in House of the Dragon, is very reluctant to ever do like a quick flashback scene, except for the very first scene of this season, I think. I think a few more of those could be helpful here and there, though, so.
I'm not a guy who wants things, I don't
you don't want your hand held, right?
Exactly. So I can't have it both ways, but This is one of those where I was like, huh, I guess that happened during the 6-year time jump. And I do recall that you mentioned there was a line about it. I guess I thought it was some sort of sarcastic sibling joke.
They're
maybe
just joking around with each other.
But as Targaryens, how could possibly not take that more seriously?
So they do kind of mention that she maybe has visions here and there, but there are no detail on them whatsoever. None of these are like verbatim from the book or anything like that. So I did catch the first one only because I went back and listened to her. 'Cause I think whatever she was saying was almost inaudible. You had to like turn the volume up quite a bit. So I caught the one about, missing the eye. And then the Beast on the Boards, I heard, but again, only because I went back and like had to crank it up and hear what she was saying. So definitely some interesting things there with her. I also, just as a curious, I feel like maybe the showrunners are making her seem almost if she's on the autism spectrum a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. No, that was the vibe that was the thing the first time
we encountered her. Which I think is really interesting.
Yes. Yeah. My thought was, well, she's saying these things, but I thought it was a way to sort of make her appear more eccentric initially. Autistic, definitely, I think is.
There's even like I know her mother like reaches out to touch her at one point, and she like really shies away from it. Either that's from trauma in her life, or just she doesn't want to be touched. Either one, I don't know. I just think it's an interesting choice there.
Yes.
So,
hey Daniel, I know we don't bring this up very often, but your day job, or you work with special needs children. Does Helaena strike you as a character that is on the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that wouldn't have been like my thought, but like thinking about it from that perspective, I think that like that could make perfect sense. I think that, I was kind of like along the view, like, oh, they're just trying to make her like a little like quirky or a little weird, kind of like even in the email, someone said like Luna Lovegood, right? Like that was sort of just like the vibe I was getting, but here someone were to say like, oh yeah, that she's on the spectrum, that's what it is, I would be like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. She exhibits a lot, obviously everybody's different and the way that that's expressed is differently for everybody, but generally speaking, that the aversion to touch and things like that make a lot of sense for someone that would be in that sort of be on the spectrum.
I'll be curious if that actress has one of these into the I tend to not watch the after the show interviews and things until the end of the season. I'll go back and watch them here and there just because sometimes they get a little spoilery.
They do.
So I'll be curious to see if she ever gets to do one, because I bet that comes up. Yeah.
I need to go back. I haven't watched all of them. By the way, fun fact, they have the ones that play after the episode that are like 6 to 7 minutes usually. But then they also, if you go through HBO Max on the special features, there's like a 25-minute version of it for every episode. Okay. And I haven't watched all of the 25-minute episodes. I think in the shorter ones, I don't think they've really brought it up yet. I can't speak to this one, though. I haven't watched for episode 9 yet. So
Interesting,
yeah. Well, Jamie Russell, thanks so much. You called it. Feel validated, and thanks for so much for sending us the email. A couple of other things I just wanted to shout out. We had some new reviews come through Apple Podcasts that for the season that I hadn't gotten to yet. So first, most recently, I think this one just went up this last week, comes from Oldest Arrow, who says, a fun and insightful podcast for Westeros fans. I really enjoy the podcast. I started listening during season 6 of Game of Thrones and was really excited when they decided to bring it back for House of the Dragon. The questions are always thoughtful and thought-provoking, and it feels like a spirited conversation with friends about a show that we all love. However, they put in parentheses, I wanted to take off a star for Caleb's pronunciation of Silmarillion. I probably said it wrong there too. By the way, it's I said Silmarillion. I think I dropped the L, so it's Silmarillion. I'm pretty sure. In the Rings of Power special episode, but I decided I couldn't be that mean, so they gave us 5 stars. Looking forward to the next episode. Thank you so much, Oldest Arrow. And by the way, I am one who will take any correction I can get on pronunciations. I thrive off of feedback, so that correction is important to me. So thank you for calling that out. We also have another one here from Video Peach, and Video Peach says, banter punctuated with insightful analysis. These guys are a blast. Not only do they help me think differently about each episode, but they have great chemistry. This is a must listen for Game of Thrones fans. Thank you so much, Video Peach, for the review. Listener, you too could have your review read on this show by heading on over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a rating and a review. And by giving us 5 stars, you can help us get discovered by more lords and ladies of the realm just like you. And as I've said before, podcasting is a lot like Game of Thrones these days. You gotta play the game well. So help us win. Help us win. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into this week's discussion, recapping the Green Council.
The king is dead.
He told me you wish for Aegon to be king.
The door remains shut until we finish our business. None can know who you are or what you seek.
What of Rhaenyra?
I have found out something you should know.
This is seizure, and it's treason at the least.
So normally, I start this off by reading the IMDb synopsis, but I don't have one for 2 reasons. One, when I was writing the show notes last night, there wasn't one. Number 2, often these things are terrible. So we're just gonna talk about the Green Council, but we're gonna start with, what did you think of the episode? Daniel Stoll.
I have some mixed feelings, but I think this podcast will help me get rid of some of those mixed feelings. We'll see. But when I first finished the episode, I actually felt like almost disappointed, and I was like, and then I would reflect on the episode of like, well, it was a good episode, why do I feel disappointed? And so I think I'm having some issues personally with like expectations, and I think that I maybe expected this show to be something that it has never shown me that it was, or whatever. I think I was waiting for like the Ned Stark getting his head chopped off moment or whatever, and I don't think that we got that, but I also don't think the show needs to do that to be good or anything like that. So I think my initial reaction was sort of coming from a place of where I had some misplaced expectations. So after I got that out of the way, I think it's a really good episode. I still think that there is a lot. I'm so excited in anticipation of what's coming next. And I do have some criticisms for this episode, but overall, I think it was a really good episode, and I like thematically. I think I like a lot of what they were doing in this episode. So,
Daniel, you said you have criticisms. Tell us, what are they? We need to know.
Well, so I mean, we didn't have Damon. I mean, that's
there was a lack of Damon in this episode.
I miss Damon. He's been in every episode, and then he's probably my favorite character, or maybe not my favorite character, but most excited character to watch.
But you got more Kristen Cole this time, you know?
Because
the man you called an incel earlier this year, you didn't want more of him?
No, absolutely not. I am ready for Kristen Cole to die. Like, I am just waiting for that to happen. And we also got nowhere near us. So I was disappointed that they weren't in it. And I'm really anxious to see how are they going to respond to this, which I think, we'll get into that next week's episode. But I did feel like they were missing. But I also really liked Alicent in this episode. I felt like she was really took the episode, stole the episode in a lot of ways. And so that was fun. And I think that, I can't remember her last name. Olivia
Cook.
Olivia Cook has been doing a wonderful job, and I think that this episode she really was shining in the way that she really took the spotlight in this episode for me. So that part was exciting.
Would you say and I'm going to bring this up in a second. I just out of curiosity though, do you feel like this is kind of episodes like this make you more accepting of the fact that we had the cast switch midway through the season?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is a good point. That was probably the episode that I had the most difficult time with so far, was that after the 10-year jump, we had the cast change. I felt that it was a little jarring, but getting to see, Rhaenys and, Alicent being up there on the stage and having them sort of have that stare down. I think those type of moments we would have been able to get to had we not had the time jump that we had. So I think the farther that we get, the more okay I am with that big time jump.
Well, and also I just think even by aging, swapping cast members to different actresses, I don't want to, I think the younger actresses were tremendous. We talked about how much we love them, but also when you bring in an Olivia Cook, the type of performance she can deliver is probably a lot different, especially because she's a few years on the other cast member as a mother. It makes me, this performance was really top notch. I absolutely think this is a scene, an episode stealer for that matter. I agree with you there. It's just one of those things. I know we were really skeptical. We liked for the first 5 episodes, we liked the young cast so much. We're like, why recast them? They were so good. But I think when we're able to see, an actress like Olivia Cook step in and really present the character in a more motherly POV, it makes the decision to swap a lot. It makes a lot more sense to me, at least.
I never had much of a problem with the actress swaps here and there. I did find Rhaenyra's actress transition harder to accept. I thought Alicent's from the jump has been incredible. I think she brings a bunch of weight to that role that it really needed, because talk about a character that's been in such a hard position, from the beginning of married off as a child, basically, to learning and growing up in court and basically at the hand of the king, and then running the kingdom to a certain extent. I think it needed that more heft that I think Olivia Cook brings.
Absolutely. So. Well, and it also allows us to see, I don't want to take away from the initial actress, but
no, I thought she was great.
She was great, but she is, for all intents and purposes, for the first 5, really mostly a very timid kind of go with the flow, go with what Otto says, where we see her aged up here. She's a little more weary, a little more tired, a little more over this shit sort of thing that I think Olivia Cook carries very well. Well, Adam, so you're a big fan of Olivia Cook. What did you think of this episode overall?
I really liked this episode. It hit on a lot of things and kind of the same points almost. I thought Alicent's character in particular had so much more depth and interesting moments added to her character where, early in the season, I kind of have been a little bit of an Alicent stan
really
this season a little bit, because I don't think people consider just the position she's been put in from the very beginning here, of pushed into the king's arms by her own father. Her mother died years before. What is she supposed to do? Say no? She doesn't really have an option. Bears the king's children at a very young age, multiple of them, and then is told by everyone around her, hey, your kids are going to have to be king. That's just the way it's going to go. And so she was quite reluctant, seemingly, to make that happen. She was just going to follow Viserys' wishes. Until that scene at the end of episode 8 where, he mistakenly thinks he's talking to Rhaenyra, delivers this, prophecy fulfillment about an Aegon, and I guess she puts her own 2 and 2 together. And I loved that moment so much because here in this next episode, we have her very honestly trying to tell the council, like, this was Viserys' last wishes, and they are all like, yeah, sure, okay, really scoffing at her, and like you can see it on her face of like this moment of, no, I am telling the truth that I know it to be. I know it sounds ridiculous. I know you won't believe me, but that's what she believes it to be. And I think that's the juicy stuff of Game of Thrones that I love so much. So
it is truly tragic and so much fun to watch a character who so truthfully believes something that is just fundamentally a misunderstanding.
Yes.
We know it's a misunderstanding, but she believes it. We'll get into that here in a minute. I think a couple things I want to highlight about the episode. One, despite me, and Daniel, I said this last week, I was like, this show has clearly positioned us to be rooting for Rhaenyra as the POV character this entire time. Well, this episode, she's not in it. I actually think that's to the benefit of the show because all of a sudden we're seeing all of these characters through an entirely different lens than we're used to looking at them through. All of a sudden, Alicent is the one who's sort of trying to protect Rhaenyra. We kind of see things from her perspective and her kid's perspective. We had been talking about how Aemond was an anime bad guy. He still is kind of an anime bad guy, but you kind of see the complexity he has with the relationship with his brother. Like there's a lot of those nuances that I just don't think we would get if we were looking at the same thing from, even Rhaenys' perspective, for example. I think it having no Daemon and having Rhaenyra, sure, miss the performances, miss the characters, but we have a more focused story, and it allows us to see just how much disagreements there are within that house. Because up until this point, we have just assumed, Alicent and Otto, same page all the time, 100%. They're always in sync. Alicent's probably just doing what Otto's telling her to do, and she's probably just feeding him information. Whereas in this episode, that is revealed that is not the case, and she's kind of over his shit. Which, again, I think adds more complexity to her character than I have given her credit for in previous episodes. So that, for me, is a huge, huge plus. Other things I really like is the way the pacing of this episode. We've been having all these time jumps and just like there's been this ambiguous sense of how much time are things actually taking. Usually you'll get like a day or a week in the life of this family. This one was really cool. The opening moments feel like they're happening in real time.
Yeah, they really slowed this one down.
Mm-hmm. They slowed it down, but also I would say that the suspense of what's going to happen was ratcheted up because of that. Sure. So I love the way it unfolds, and you're like, oh, who's gonna find Aegon first? Just lots of fun with that. My big hang up, and we can dive into whether or not it worked for you guys when we get to the end of the episode. Why did Rhaenys not torch those mofos and stop an entire war?
Or do we need to get to the dragon in the room here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is the dragon in the room. I think they do it. Rhaenys and Alicent have a great scene in the middle of the episode.
Great scene.
It is. It really is a great scene that does sort of justify why she doesn't do it almost. But I'm just like, it's tough. I have mixed feelings.
I have reasonings, I feel like.
You have reasonings?
I think.
Okay. All right.
If we want to get there, I don't know. Whenever. So.
We'll get to it.
Okay, cool.
With that said, though, listeners, as you can tell, we are all very pro on the episode. Daniel, I hope Adam and I can win you over to the super pro this episode. I think this is a great episode 9, which brings me to my next question. We've talked about how Game of Thrones has the iconic episode 9, and I want to ask you guys if you thought it delivered. Daniel, it sounds like you're a hard no on that. You're saying not an episode 9 Game of Thrones.
I would say like hard no. Again, I think part of my expectation was the problem. I think like thinking back to Game of Thrones first season, the Ned Stark moment is like, you can't get to that point, right? But in like somehow in my head, I was like waiting for that in a way, and it wasn't fair of me really to have those expectations for the show. Like, you're never going to have that moment again. So when I was able to put that aside, I do think that this was like, a big episode 9. That scene where there's like I don't, all those people, all the, common folk are coming in, and like, it's just this huge, massive, like, hall of people. And then you get to see the reveal of Rhaenys dragon and all that. I think all that stuff is great. But like you said, the actual moment that happens is like not that consequential in the end.
Exactly.
And that is the thing that I think is missing to be like Game of Thrones episode 9, right? Like, so it still feels like a lot of like table setting in a lot of ways. And we have sort of said this phrase, I think, a couple times on the podcast, and I think it's more becoming more true in my mind. I feel like this season is kind of serving as a prologue for the rest of the show. And I think, like after episode 10, like all the place, like that's part of the time jump. That's why we've been moving so fast and stuff like that. So when we get to the end of this season, we'll be like, okay, now we can tell the story of like this epic civil war that's going to occur. I'm assuming between, Daemon and Rhaenyra trying to like, claim their spot as heirs and all that. We just need to know all this information before that war started, kind of thing. So I think that like the really impactful consequential moment didn't really happen, but I guess I'm only even like figuring this out for myself is this that show? And I don't know if it is or not. And that doesn't make it bad. It's just not, again, removing my expectation from that, I think, is what I've had to do. But yeah, I think it was a great episode 9. It just isn't like the world changing episode 9 that we've had in the past from like Game of Thrones.
The paradigm is really not shifting after this episode, is what you're saying. Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just because of Viserys more than anything, right? Like, and that's really happened. Like, we knew that we've known that's been coming for a long time now. Like, we were making bets, on what episode he was going to die on, like, because we knew that was going to happen. So, this is what we've been waiting for, but we still haven't really gotten the full reaction to his death yet. And so that's why it feels like it's not fully resolved.
I wonder if they are trying to play off that expectation, of like set you up for believing, because I watched the show and Game of Thrones with my wife, and she hasn't read the books or anything like that. She's just, here for the ride, but she loves to literally grab the remote when any tense moment comes up and pause it and be like, tell me right now what's about to happen. And so as Aegon's walking out into the dragon pit for his coronation, she grabbed it. She was like, what's about to happen here? Was like someone, she thought like he was going to get attacked or killed or, something like that. I was like, no, he's just going to become king. Like that's all. So,
Oh, but she got so mad at you after the dragon busted the floor.
She was like, oh my God. So,
but I imagine, so the dragon in the room was a show invention.
That is a show invention. That does not happen. I was definitely surprised. When you see it coming, kind of, I didn't know what to expect. I figured, Rhaenys was going to show up on her dragon some way or form. I thought they were going to see her flying away, to be totally honest.
Sure.
Like that made sense to me. More so because I don't know the mechanics of how a dragon busts through a floor in the middle of a dragon pit designed to keep dragons in it. We'll get there.
It sounds like, so what you're saying is the architects or the engineers who made the dragon pit definitely didn't make it foolproof.
There was kind of an interesting decision there. I liked the moment as a whole because it was surprising, and part of why I've liked this season so much is they have done things to surprise even people that have read the books and have an understanding of what's coming. Like, there's been so many little moments here and there, and I expect way more moments to come that will be surprising in the way things play out. This was just kind of one of those big Game of Thrones moments to me, like that was more for the spectacle of it than anything else. Like, They wanted to, it had been a couple episodes since we had seen a dragon. So like, let's show you a dragon. Here it comes. So, it's interesting just because you think like, well, why else would she pop up through that floor, stare down these people that are committing treason, and then just fly away? So I think it was to send a message. It is to be like, this is what's about to come. Are you sure you're ready for it? The reasoning, I think, for not roasting them is, that's her family. At the end of the day, those are people that she's known and loved, and I think they've done a really good job throughout this season. Had to think back on it. They have shown Rhaenys in particular as the person who's experienced death so many times.
Oh, yeah.
Her daughter, her son, her husband, her brother-in-law. I guess her husband's still alive.
I was going to say question mark on the husband. We haven't heard the words yet.
So I think they've really, made her understand the consequences of what's going on and be that person for the audience in a way. Even more so, there was a moment, she wasn't in it, but when Otto and Alicent are speaking to each other, Alicent tells him, like, hey, it's not a moral flaw to not want to murder people, basically. It's like that should be a good thing,
right,
to have some hesitancy there. And so, I don't know, I think that maybe is an underlying theme here for just this episode. So
we'll see. It shows that there is definitely intention on both sides of the aisle, quote unquote,
for sure,
to not murder each other. But also, we know what's coming, guys. I mean, people are going to die. All right. With that said, though, keeping time in mind, let's go ahead and jump into sort of the episode recap. So, just to start us off, I mentioned that the opening moments is really they play out in real time, seemingly for a few, maybe say the first 5 or so minutes. So we see that the word of the king's demise has passed, and Talia, Daniel, who our guest host Chad gave us the briefing on last week, then spreads that word to Mysaria, aka what she is the white.
White worm.
White worm, that's it. I keep wanting to say widow. I don't know why. The white...
It'd be a better name for her, White Widow.
But Mysaria, a.k.a., as we learned in this episode, the white worm. And we do receive confirmation that Alicent seems to believe Viserys' dying words to mean he wanted Aegon to be king. And now, Adam, you already hit on this a little bit, but I do, for the listeners, want to follow up on a conversation Daniel and I had with our last guest. I was honestly under the impression she was way more self-motivated. I knew she was going to take those words and have the wrong takeaway. I was under the impression she was totally going to twist that to her own benefit, and it was going to be a lot more malevolent than what we got here. It seems to me that she sincerely believes that's what Viserys said on the deathbed. Daniel, any thoughts on the change of heart? Do you think this is a becoming moment for Alicent? I mean, what was your take here?
Yeah, I think she wholeheartedly believes it. And I think she's even like conflicted, like not conflicted about whether she believes it or not, because I think she totally believes it, but is like, I can't believe that I'm actually going to have to go in here and say this to all these people who are not going to believe me. Like, but I have to do this. And so I think that's what makes this so interesting for her, is because I think she 100% thinks that he is telling her to put Aegon, as the king, and follow his in the succession that way. And she is like, I can't believe that I'm the one that has to like bear this in a way. Like, but like, kudos to her, she believes it and tries to do her absolute best to make that come true. So yeah, I completely bought that she is. Like you said, being 100% honest about it and not trying to twist it, not trying to make it something that it's not, but genuinely just saying this is what Viserys wanted, and so I'm going to try to make that happen. Which really shows, like, despite everything that's happened, how much she at some level, she really did care a lot about him. Obviously she was forced into that relationship, but she was able to find a way to have like genuine care for him. And, obviously he is also the father, of her children and stuff, but didn't really expect, kind of like you didn't expect that level of, expected more of like a conniving, but like, no, this was very like tenderhearted, trying to honor him, which was surprising, but nice.
I won't. I'm going to pass to Adam in a second. But one thing, when you were talking there, that kind of came to mind. It's interesting how this show seems to remix a lot of the elements from the first season of Game of Thrones in particular. So I'm thinking about how Alicent contrasts Cersei, who was very politically motivated and was just dying for that guy to go. Like, she just could not wait. In fact, actually got him killed.
Set it up. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's and then maybe that's where I appreciate how the show is playing against our expectations, where we're like, oh, we've seen this before. She's just in this for the politics. She doesn't really care about him. But she did have his legit children, unlike Cersei, for example. And you're right, Daniel. It does appear that she did have a genuine affection for him, and that was also underscored by Rhaenyra's speech in last episode. Adam, like, how does this sort of approach from Alicent to break the news? What does this tell you about her character? And is it a plus, a win? What do you think?
As a character, it is interesting because I think I maybe spoke slightly out of turn on my praise for Alicent last time. She definitely has been playing the game. Like, I don't think that she's been helping her father. They set in court. Let's not forget the last episode, they literally had a coup set up, basically, to take over the Driftmark throne in the name of their own children. So, basically. So, she's not wholly innocent, but I think in her mind, this prophecy that her husband's spitting out here at the very end of life became a innocent way, because she is now of the faith and holy, though not
Light of the Seven.
Light of the Seven. Kind of gives her almost that like pass in a way. It's like, well, I mean, he said it. So like, this is God's will in a way, you know, something like that. Like, I think that's really interesting and a good, like, I can't wait to possibly hear her try and explain it to someone on the blacks, you know, like to try and get, I mean, we saw it with Rhaenys, her explanation of like, I promise, I know that sounds ridiculous, but he said it. And she was just like, okay, we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
My favorite reaction is later when she tries to tells Aegon, that's what he said. And he's like, just laughs at her.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And again, Alicent's an interesting one. I read in an interview a few weeks ago that they actually had her do research on Trump supporting women for the character, which I found really curious. And I still don't know how to make the connection 100%, but it does seem like there's something about her that's tragic, and that I do believe she is always well-intentioned. She just has a distorted version of morality that has been filtered through previous men in her life, whether it was Otto, whether it was her sons, whether it is Viserys himself. She has had to live within the confines of the patriarchy, essentially. And that's sort of been her guiding, and the Light of the Seven, of course, has been sort of the guiding light for how she's made these decisions. So that's why it's so tough when she's done some pretty heinous stuff. I mean, let's also remember how she, moments after Rhaenyra gave birth to a child's like, I want to see that baby.
I want to see it. Yep.
Right? You know, It's just terrible. It's cruel and it's callous. However, I appreciate this episode for giving us that a little more insight into her POV and seeing that there is some weird, distorted, like, rationale, human rationale for why she's making these decisions.
Well, and Rhaenys kind of gives us that character breakdown of Alicent in that scene when they're together of like, hey, you're doing all these things, but for who? You know, you're doing it for the men in your life.
Yep.
I loved the line about the window in your prison, you know, like such good
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, that's what makes that scene between Alicent and Rhaenys so interesting, is because like they directly talk about the patriarchy and how the two of them respond differently to it. So that's definitely that insight that we get into Alicent we'll get to that scene, but yeah, I totally agree.
Well, and here's the thing. I actually think this segues really nicely into the follow-up scene where they actually go into the small council. And I have this thought as a small council of treachery ? So after she tells Otto this news, he then goes and shares it with the small council. And these guys are ready. They're like, all right, so, okay, he's dead. He's like, let's take a moment of silence to mourn the death of the king.
Not even.
All right, and then one of the Lannisters, I can't remember which one, but one of the Lannisters speaks up.
Jaime Lannister. I'm pretty sure is it not Jaime Lannister?
I actually am blanking on his name.
Oh man,
I think it's
Jason?
Jaime.
I think it's Jason.
Jason. No, wait, Jason. You're right.
Okay,
I think you're right. It's Jason Lannister.
Jason Lannister. Well, whichever Lannister it was, listeners can correct me. I think it's Jason. Is basically like, he gives about maybe 5 seconds. He's like, all right, so we're good to move on with the plan, right? Like, we've already discussed this. Then all of a sudden, Otto's like, yeah, that thing it was totally such a corporate America. Like, all right, so remember that thing I discussed? I know we weren't all in the same room when we discussed it, but I discussed with all of you guys this thing. Let's just do it. And then Alicent has this moment of being like, wait, you guys were all plotting this without me? And they're all like, yeah, kind of, but we didn't want to bother you with such awful crimes.
Yes.
So I want to dig into that a little bit too. So despite Otto's plan really aligning, I think, again, with what Alicent is saying the king wanted, with what we have heard her say she wants, she's still pretty unhappy with the plan as presented. So Adam, I mean, why is that?
I think they did a fairly solid job of the episode before, kind of reminding you of the friendship she has with Rhaenyra. And so she hears this plan come out of like, well, we need to immediately have, they ask the Kingsguard, go to Dragonstone, do the king's justice, basically.
Act swiftly.
Yeah, act swiftly and cleanly. And they want them to go and execute, basically probably both Daemon and Rhaenyra. At least take them prisoner, probably was the stated goal, but was probably more so, hey, just execute them if we can do that. And probably their sons too. And Alicent hears this and is like, no, that is not what Viserys would want. Just because he named Aegon, which I do definitely believe, kind of a thing. Just because he named Aegon as heir right before he died doesn't mean he wants Rhaenyra dead. He loved her. He loved his brother. He loved those grandsons. So let's pump the brakes on this. Let's figure out a different solution. Let's figure out some terms that we can deliver to her and make sure that this doesn't cause a war, even though we think no matter what, it's going to probably cause a war. So it was a really interesting moment because, you can see that she has a lot of hesitancy, but also just, I don't know, it almost, she's just conflicted. It's written all over her about, what she do. Her head is in her hands. She's pulling on her hair a bit. She doesn't know, what leads to peace or what leads to, the outcome she wants. But she knows in her, what she thinks is that Viserys said, well, it needs to be Aegon. So that's just her motivating factor there.
I love, again, how it shows the nuances. It's like, yeah, we're all on the same team, but we have fundamentally different approaches to how to accomplish this goal of getting Aegon on the throne. I found that to be pretty compelling, but I want to reiterate, Olivia Cook, amazing performance. Even when she's not talking, she's just kind of sitting there, taking it in, almost in shock. I mean, you see it on every frame that she's in. She just doesn't know what to do or what to say. And we also see Lord Beesbury just accidentally gets killed suddenly.
Accidentally, forcefully, who knows?
Thanks, Sir Kristen. It's just one of those things where the tension gets ratcheted up in that room for those people. So she's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing and get myself killed either, Daniel, what was your take on this entire small council scene and how Alicent decided to play it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the fact that it wasn't 12 hours maybe ago that they were having a nice little dinner all together as a family. That was the night before, and
yep.
they were all having these wonderful things that they were saying about each other, right? So it just we talked about it when we talked about that scene, just how short lived that was. But I think the takeaway for me is how Alicent, the connection that she had with Viserys, it really does seem like she is motivated to try to honor his memory and try to do what he would do. Also, fuck Kristen Cole. Just got to say that. Screw that guy. I'm over him completely. I'm ready for him to die. And I think it's interesting. We talked a lot. We mentioned, I think, on one of our podcasts about how Otto was being so subtle in the way that he was maneuvering a lot this season.
Apparently
and
not,
now,
right?
Yeah, that's out the window. It is completely gone now. And
well, no, I think, but I want to pause there for a second because I do think he was quietly maneuvering. He was doing things in the shadows, out of the POV of our main characters. And now that Viserys is out, he's like, all right, party's on, guys, let's do this thing. And he's like, all those conversations we're having, let's do it. And he's not afraid. He doesn't feel like he has to hide who he is anymore, right?
Right. And he also just sort of assumes that everyone in the room is with him too. Obviously that's not the case, but that's sort of his take. And just at the speed in which he wants this to occur is like hyper fast. It's like you said, he's already ready to send people to assassinate Rhaenyra and Daemon supposedly within instance. So I think that goes to say that like they were obviously this plan was already in place before, we got to Viserys' death. Like they've been waiting for this a long time. But I really, really like how Alicent responds. We've already talked about her, a lot, but I think she just steals the show. And I think that the way that she takes control of the situation is probably my favorite part of this episode.
It is interesting, just like in comparison to the book, some of the fun things here. Lord Beesbury, it's a mystery how he dies.
Oh.
In the book. Kristen Cole is apparently responsible for the killing, but they have so many different accounts of what actually happened. Some say he was stabbed after drawing his blade against Kristen Cole, which he did a good job of telling you exactly how old he was right before he got murdered. So I thought that was interesting. Another one says he was thrown from the window and landed in the courtyard, basically, and people saw it. And so to have it go down this way and that he just basically hit his cool ball thing that represents, I don't know what. I don't know what those are for. They're really cool. But
I've heard, so I think I read somewhere that they kind of compared it to clocking in at work, but I'm like, but that doesn't make sense because these guys are always working.
Yeah,
so,
you're sitting at the table. Doesn't that mean you're
right,
there?
you're already there. But death by conference room, I guess they weren't ready for that one.
Not a fun way to go. So
yeah, no, that's a fun fact. I love that. The way because I heard, like, for example, when Daemon's wife died, I heard that in the book, it's just one line. She like fell off her horse.
Yep. Yeah.
And died in an accident.
That's what I'm saying. A lot of these big scenes are like just one throwaway line almost that you're like, oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. How did that happen?
Oh, man.
Aegon's disappearance, which we'll get to, is another one that there's a bunch of different accounts for. So.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, let's get to it because I think between that and what Daniel just said about Alicent taking control of the situation, this is where the tension in the episode really comes from, I think. I actually want to ask you guys about this. Aegon is missing. Just at potentially the most important moment of his life, he just happens to be missing. I don't know, guys. A lot of whether this episode is going to work for you is going to depend on whether or not you buy that he just happens to be missing in this very pivotal moment. I think I was willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit because it just seems so convenient, but it did create some pretty cool tension within the episode. Daniel, am I crazy, or was it just? Did it feel like somewhat of a stretch that he just happened to be gone at this exact moment?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think you have the conversation with the guard, Eryck or Arryk. I don't know which one it was.
Well,
one of the twins.
It's rough.
Yeah, one of those twins. Where he's like, it seems like this happens a lot. Where he's like, oh yeah, he just evades me. Sorry, like whatever. Like, just so nonchalant.
It's my
about
job to watch him, but he slips through my fingers.
Like, if we had like maybe like a scene earlier in the season where he had slipped him, and or whatever, we sort of had like a basis for that, maybe it'd be more believable. But whatever. That being said, like we have seen other characters sneak out of the castle, so it's not like completely unrealistic that like other characters, he could have slipped out without the guards knowing or whatever. So it's not that much that I don't buy it, but for me, like I don't really care about Aegon that much. The whole time I was like, maybe if he's dead, like Aemon will get to be the king, and that could be interesting because I'm way more interested in his character than Aegon right now. So that was more for me, like where like maybe there was some uninterested in this storyline comes from not being interested in Aegon as a character right now, just because he's so pathetic.
He's the MacGuffin, right? Right. They commit. So I know Ryan Condal in an interview I read compared this to a Hitchcockian like suspense thriller, and the thing is he's the like Aegon. Daniel, and we're gonna pass it to you here in a second, Adam. But Daniel and I hate Aegon. I think we're supposed to. So, oh no, the character we hate might be dead or missing. Cool, but at the same time, he's the MacGuffin because he has such an important role in terms of like the throne. You kind of have to be invested because he represents the power. Where's the power? Who's going to get him first, right? I think it. I was willing. That's why I was willing to buy it. I hate the character. I feel like it's weirdly convenient that he's gone. However, because of what he represents, it really created. I just think such a fun episode and just sort of like plot driver. Now, Adam, you mentioned the differences with the book here. firstly, did you like what they did with the episode? And maybe you can fill us in on some of the other details as well.
Yes. And so there's a bunch of things here. I've got them all. But let's start with the convenient factor of him being missing. It's beyond convenient. It was planned. Misara takes him and hides him away after she got word from Talia's handmaiding through the candle lighting. And so it wasn't... Aegon would go out into the streets pretty often, as his guard attested to. He would always come back, though. This time, though, he got kind of kidnapped in a way by Misara because she knew the king was dead and that, I've got the heir, and so I can probably leverage this into something. That was kind of interesting in the fact, like, that's kind of a weird play in terms of, like, what she asked for in the end.
I do. I think that, we'll get to that, but it is
I'm not exactly
play.
sure why that was the thing she was gunning for there. So, but to even back up, I loved it because it again kind of gets into the layers of Game of Thrones here. Aegon is so important. He is a terrible person. He's a rapist. Mm-hmm. He, eggs on, his own family members, fights them. All in all, bad dude. Not the worst king we've ever seen, but definitely up there.
He's not quite Joffrey bad because we haven't seen how cruel he could be, but not too far off either.
But the factors of why it has to be Aegon are so interesting. One, his name's Aegon. The beginning of the Targaryen dynasty started with Aegon the Conqueror. So there's the symbolism there is so important. They even tell you on later in the episode, they gave him Aegon the Conqueror's crown to wear and his sword and to have. And so like he's the puppet. They need him to look the part. So like they need him to dress up. And imagine the scene in the Dragon Pit again if like they had been like, and here's Aemond, who's the second brother. Like it just doesn't play. Like right. I mean, it barely.
The narrative is not as strong.
Narrative is not as strong. It barely plays that it's Aegon. Like that crowd's reaction is pretty tepid at first. Like they're like, oh. Okay, clap, clap, clap. Like it's just a slow build to when he finally gets his standing O there at the end. But so like I love that factor of it. There's also like the unwillingness of Aegon. That is a line in the book, basically, that they say that he initially was unwilling to take the throne from his sister, because I think we always forget that Rhaenyra is his sister. Yeah. Much older sister, but his sister. And so he comes out and he says, oh no, I can't do that. Like this is from the book. Like one account is that he refused. And so, he tried to refuse, but they convinced him by saying like, oh, Daemon, if Daemon becomes, de facto king, that won't go well. And so like that convinces him to take over. And so, but we see that his reluctance is really, based on the fact that he didn't like his upbringing. He thinks both of his parents hate him and used him and are using him still, and he doesn't want a part of that. And which I think is a really interesting change there in terms of how they swung it. So all those things combined, I really did like. In terms of the places we go to find Aemond, the places we'll go. They start off at a brothel. That's pretty standard, like you would have thought. And even Aemond was like, yeah, I've been here with him, so let's start here. They tell you that Aemon's tastes are, Aegon's tastes are a little bit darker than that, basically, which is a sign of things to come. I think you can probably pick up on. Mm-hmm. They go to the children fighting pits.
Yeah, I didn't know what to call it when in the notes I put arena, but it's like. I didn't want to say
definitely the fighting pits, which has been a thing I've known about in Game of Thrones. Like they're mentioned, right? The different characters have come from there.
Most specifically, I think the place that show watchers are probably most familiar with the concept would be over across the Narrow Sea, in Marine, where you see Daenerys fights very hard to keep them closed,
Yes.
but she reluctantly opens them back up to try to appease
The people.
The people.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I had never heard of a children's fighting pit, I guess, but in the book, one of the accounts of where Aegon was from the court jester. His name is Mushroom, and he is fully on Rhaenyra's side. And basically his accounts are always very slanted in terms, they're always ridiculous too. Like the most debaucherous things come from Mushroom. And so his account says like that's where Aegon was. He was in the children's fighting pit, betting on, these kids killing each other basically. So it was like, I thought it was going to be, not a thing we'd ever see. And then lo and behold, there it is. So, and then also lo and behold, we see a small Targaryen looking boy sitting
Yes.
off in a corner. So like
One of they imply one of many.
one of many, which if you get down to the heart of things is the reason why Otto and Alicent don't want Rhaenyra to be king, because she believes she has bastards. Oh, and yet Aegon has his own sets of bastards, so all kinds of
that's the-
hypocrisy going on.
I was gonna say the Hightowers are full of hypocrisy. They did in fact marry their two oldest their two
Yes,
children, their
yeah.
their oldest son and then their oldest daughter, which seems to go against the way of
You
the
would
seven,
think.
But
Yeah.
hey,
But Targaryen, traditions trump all, I guess. So
the narrative. Remember,
It's
the
the
narrative is
narrative.
important.
yeah.
So I think it sounds like we're all on board, and thank you for laying that out a little bit more on the history. And also, one thing you noted there, the account-based nature of Fire and Blood. We haven't really talked about it on the show, but it's not just, it is a historical recounting of the Targaryen history, but it's made up from multiple POVs, right? Is that correct?
So it's called the true telling, and through that it includes multiple different possibilities for most of the stories, just based on who the teller is. So it's almost as if I'm trying to think of a good example. I'll just explain it. It's mostly different septums and different maesters, and occasionally an outsider like a Mushroom, who is, like I said, a court jester, but apparently heard many things. They all wrote down their own accounts, and then one maester took them all and put them together and didn't want to leave one thing out. And so he just kind of puts it all. And like each story almost ends with, that's the way so-and-so tells it. That's the way this person tells it. And this is the way this. So you get all these possibilities, which I'm sure as showrunners, they were probably stoked about,
Oh yeah.
because it lets them, if they want to take a wild left turn at one point, they can pull a Mushroom storyline up and make it the true telling, which is really interesting. And also, I wonder how George R. R. Martin feels about that, because it really sets in stone a lot of things in a way that I bet he never wanted it, but also he is helping. So I guess
he's been very active in the show. I think he's listed as an EP, and
I never know what that actually means, to be honest.
No, that's a fair question. I can't remember if we mentioned it on this podcast, but executive producer could mean a lot of things.
It just means your name's on it sometimes, right?
Like he was technically an executive producer of Game of Thrones, but he really was not active in the show after, I think, season 5. And this show, my understanding is he is very in sync with Ryan Condal. He reviews, he reviewed the scripts, and he reviews the edits of the episodes before they final.
Even just his I'm sure you both saw it. He had huge praise for Paddy Connaughton's Viserys, and like that even surprised me a little bit. Like, didn't you help write it? Like, why are you surprised that it's so good in a way? I guess so. Anyway, I've always been wondering what that actually means when the author's involved. So
Well, and that's the ambiguity. You're like, okay, his name's on it. He says he's reviewed stuff, but what does that mean? Is he just like giving his opinion? Is he actively have any sort of creative authority on the show? How much does he see ahead of time? Yeah, it's a big question mark, and one I'm interested to find out about after this season wraps up. I'm sure some stories will come out. Also, I think what I'm confident about is that he is much more in the loop than he was on the back half of Game of Thrones.
It definitely seems that way. Yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to note there. The closest you were trying to come up with an example. The closest one, as you're describing it, that comes to mind for me, not to be blasphemous for any of those of you who are believers.
I guess it'd be the Bible.
The Bible.
Yes,
You know, the teaching, the first 4 books of the New Testament. You know, you have 4 different accounts of the life of the end of Jesus' life.
Sure.
And all of them tell and highlight different stories. There's some overlap, but mostly different unique perspectives. So,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
all right. So with that said, though,
Now let's get away from the Bible as quickly as possible.
As possible, exactly. Let's talk about Visery and Otto. So, you talked about a moment ago, Adam, how weird it was that she literally has a trump card. You know, she's like, I know the king's dead. No one else knows that. Also, I know where the heir's at. So you're going to give me... I like how he's like, are you just another, what was it, like worm in this layered onion or whatever? And then she just drops that knowledge and he's like, give her the money. All right, what do you want? Immediately. And she could have asked for anything. And her request is to stop the fighting in the fighting pits, which one, noble cause. Love this. She's like, must run like she's over all these brothels, but her request feels like it's coming more from a nonprofit perspective, which is, can we just make this a better place to live, which is noble. But I'm curious because for us in this podcast, at least, it seems we've discussed Visery as a very much a wild card. We don't know what she wants. We don't really even know how large her web of influence spreads, although this episode makes apparent that it's pretty large. But in this specific moment, she appears to be speaking for the people. So I want to hear, Daniel, I'll start with you. I mean, what was your take on why she was asking, for this? What does this mean for her character? Is it a larger political play, do you think? Or do you think she just genuinely wants to make King's Landing a better place for the people?
Yeah, that's the thing with her character is I don't know. Honestly, I still don't feel like I have a good read on her. And that may be intentional. I'm not sure, but she definitely surprised me with how much, we saw. There's been little scenes throughout the season. Like the first one I can think back to is, the whole Daemon and Rhaenyra in a brothel. Like she is kind of responsible for that knowledge getting back to Otto. So it seems like that is where their connection, they've had a connection for quite a long time. And so she's been able to sort of have a lot of knowledge and like you said, much bigger web than we had initially thought. But I still don't really know what her overall purpose is or goal and how she really plays into the story other than just providing. It seems like it's got to be bigger than just giving Otto information And we don't know, as far as I know, we don't know who her family is or if she's connected to anyone or, anything like that. So yeah, to me, she's still just a major wild card. I really don't know what she's trying to do. I mean, my guess would be if you're trying to clean up, you want the child fighting pits to stop, your goal, that's something that you care about. Because it doesn't seem like, why would she want them to because if they stop that, Aegon looks good for that, right? Not her. So it must just be her being having a noble cause. That's the only thing I can come up with, because other than that, I really don't know, what I'm supposed to look for in her character.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add there, one thing Game of Thrones, I think, generally didn't do the best job at conveying, and this show has sort of hinted at it, but not done it so either, is representing we see what happens with the ruling class, but how does this really impact the the middle class, the people in poverty, the people who actually live in these cities and in the world of Westeros? How do their decisions impact these people? And I feel like this is a tip to that. We're getting a little glimpse into hey, these are real problems that you guys don't care about, and I'm telling you to care about it, and I'm making you take action on it. I don't know. I don't know what the ends are. And Adam, I don't want to assume that they talk about this in the books, but if they do, don't spoil it. However, what is your take on Visery and what her game is in this scenario?
I think you're pretty spot on the power of the people. And I think without spoiling much, I'll just say the power of the people will play a bigger factor in the seasons to come. So
Okay. That's what I like to hear, because I really did feel like that was missing from most of Game of Thrones. Little glimpses of it here and there, you know, Joffrey getting some cow pie in the face, but really
one of my favorite Game of Thrones.
That is exciting to like just sort of like, okay, like there is going to be like something bigger here. That's and like you're saying, Caleb, like that would be really cool to see like how the common person or the people are affected or about this stuff. So that is exciting to hear.
Well, and it makes sense because that it's coming from Visery, because even Daemon, when he went and he took Rhaenyra to the brothels, was like, hey, you really need to care what these people think. And oh, coincidence, it happens to be with at the time his mistress, who is saying it now. I think that's an interesting connection.
And even backing up a little bit earlier in the season, when he presents her as his wife to be, carrying his child, which she wasn't. Right. She reminded him once they got back inside Dragonstone, like, you can't do that with me because I am a regular person. Like, I can be taken off the board at a moment's notice and no one will care. You're a prince. Like, you're at a different station. So I think that is going to be her role, is to represent sort of the everyday person of King's Landing a little bit. Clearly, she's a bit above that, even.
You're owning and running all the brothels, but that
and
said,
running the spy web.
Yes. Which Laris hints at a little later. Really quick question here. We do see that Aegon is retrieved by Sir Eryck and Arryk Cargyll. I'm not going to try to figure out which one's which. I don't know, but one of them is not on board with the plan from the Hightowers.
That's Sir Eryck.
Sir Eryck with an E.
Yes.
Not
Sir Arryk.
Eryck is the rebel, and Arryk is the guy who's loyal.
Okay, yes, who tries to get Aegon.
Okay,
Aegon.
All right. So they successfully find him. Eryck, when Kristen Cole shows up, Eric's like, "Hey, bro, I'm gonna let you fight it out." This whole thing's
his own
bro.
Yeah,
the twin decides to just chill out and let the fight go down. And we see Kristen and Aemon come out on top. I did find the exchange specifically between Aemon and Aegon pretty great. Aegon's like, I don't want it. You take it. And Aegon's like, you have no idea how much I want that to happen.
I will put you on a boat. Like, is the look on his face.
Yeah. Really quickly, though, I do want to, we've already hit on this a bit. So I know for the sake of time, I don't want to elaborate on it too much. But I do think that the way that we see Aegon react throughout this episode tells us a lot about, or at least hints at what kind of king he would be. So Daniel, I wanted to hear from you. I mean, how do you think the writers kind of use this quest in a clever manner to sort of reveal these bits about his character?
I mean, yeah, he's really apathetic to a lot of things. And in fact, like, it seems like he sees like the people as a tool for entertainment for himself. Whether they be women or children, they are there to like provide him with some sort of entertainment or enjoyment valuable, and that's as far as their value goes. So not looking good. We've already talked about like not going to be a great king. Like, and we'll talk about the way that it really, maybe this is my own problem. It really irks me the way that he responds to the crowd later. We'll get into that, but it does not seem to care about anyone. And I know he does have that moment with Alicent where he's like, y'all don't love me. Maybe there's some empathy or sympathy that I should have for him there. But not looking good to be a ruler in any kind of good capacity looking forward.
At least give some understanding of maybe what his reluctancy is, but sympathy still hard to come by.
Yeah,
I feel like.
It's tough. It's tough because you do empathize. I mean, guys got daddy issues and a little bit of mommy issues, and I mean, we can all relate to that. But on the other hand, not all of us are going around raping people or running away when they're summoned. When the moment comes, you run away from it. And
I don't think I don't think his issues are even that unjustified. Like, I mean, Viserys clearly loved Rhaenyra the most. Like, out of all of his children.
Yeah, true.
Like, so like there's 100% like some animosity that could be built, pent up in him that I think makes total complete sense. But, and we've talked about how Alicent, you talked about other people around him and treat him. So like, I don't think that part is necessarily completely unjustified, but like that doesn't justify anything that he does, or anything like that. He had a lot of other, a lot of options that he could have chosen, and he decides to treat people like dirt. So not going to be a great king.
I'm interested to see. Genuinely don't know where this is going. I'm interested to see if he turns out how he turns out. Is he going to be a Joffrey? And what I mean is he going to be like a dog off his leash? They can't control him, sort of thing, or is he going to fall in line with what Otto or Alicent wants? That's my big question. And he really seems to lack a backbone, which leads me to believe that he's just going to fall in line. But on the other hand, he has a little bit of this resentment, and you see pop up frequently where you're like, he might just be passive aggressive and not listen to them at times. I don't know. We'll see. I want to jump ahead because I want to make sure we have ample time to talk about the scene with Rhaenys, because Rhaenys is not going silently. After being locked in her chambers, Alicent confronts Rhaenys, where she states that she would have, where Alicent goes as far as to state that Rhaenys should have been queen instead of Viserys taking the title of king. So I want to hear from you guys. There is a mutual respect between these characters partially established in this scene. And two questions. We'll start with the first one. What do you think this scene tells you about Alicent's larger goals for the Seven Kingdoms? Daniel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so this is sort of what I was talking about earlier. I think it's interesting. I think she says something to the effect of like she wants to, the patriarchy exists and there's nothing I can do about that, but I can maybe influence like the men around me. It's kind of like what I feel like she said. I don't remember her exact words, but that was sort of like the vibe that I was getting. And so, all the men want to, we talked a lot about like all these men at the table earlier were like wanting to immediately go to violence. We want to kill Daemon. We want to kill Rhaenyra. And she is the one woman that's like, no, let's not go straight to killing people. Right. Like, so she does have this sense of like, despite, some of the, with the way that she's handled Rhaenyra in that relationship, and maybe she hasn't been like totally pure and all that type of, made perfectly good decisions. And she's made some, corrupt decisions, but in that there is some goodness in her where it does seem like she is trying to do things as peacefully as possible. And so that was sort of, it was interesting how Rhaenys was owning her own power in that, and not just we saw that in her relationship with Corlys, right, where they seem to be like equals in a lot of ways, where no other couple relationships seem to have that sort of equality. So Rhaenys is able to be her own person and not just submit to the whims of the men around her, but able to own her own autonomy and you still utilize her power that way. And Alicent has been a victim in a lot of ways to the patriarchy. She loses her best friend, and she just becomes this figure. And so it's really awesome to see after this that she responds by, taking some control, and not just doing, what her father says. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, it's, I think shows that Alicent's goal is to influence the power to the greatest possible. I might restate it again. Alicent's goal is to really influence the power to the best of her ability. Whereas Rhaenys is saying, yeah, but wouldn't you like to sit on the Iron Throne? Come on. Adam, I mean, what did you make about this sort of difference of approach in this scene?
I loved actually the pause there after she asked that question, because it's written all over Alicent's face. She looks like she wants to say, of course I do. But she knows that's never a reality. And I think in her life, if you think about it, she's never been able to kind of, dally in those fantasies a bit. Like, that's not her world. She's been, instructed and told and shown what to do, and has very little, has never really been able to come up with the plan all on her own. And so now we even see it. You kind of touched on it earlier. This is really the beginning of her diversion, even from her father. It's the beginning of her own plan. She wants to be able to touch and control every aspect of this transition to her son, because she knows, or she thinks she knows, the best way of keeping him safe. And that's whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but we'll get to find out. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating that she kind of tries to power play Rhaenys a little bit, into being like, you have until the morning and like to decide. Or even she even say a couple hours. I can't remember.
It was not a lot of time. She's like, just ring the bell when you
ring
made a
the bell
decision.
when you've made a decision. That's right. And Rhaenys is a formidable foe. Like, this is a person that almost, as a woman, became the ruler of Westeros. She has a powerful dragon. She obviously was well spoken and thought of enough that she even got put up by her father for that position. And so to really kind of come at her like that kind of showed you where Alicent's at, I think. She's at the what she, I guess, perceives probably as the goal line here. Like, I gotta push us over the edge here so that we can secure this. And to do that, I really need this person on my side.
Right.
So.
Yes, absolutely. But little does she know that Rhaenys is not going to go quietly. Formidable opponent or ally. Rhaenys doesn't, that's the whole thing though. She won't go with the status quo. She is going to go with what she believes is right. And, it's very convenient that she got snuck out. Thank God for Eryck, who smuggled her out later, because I can't imagine Rhaenys having I'm on your side. I can't imagine her opening the door and saying, yeah, I'm on your side. But I also don't see her going quietly as a prisoner either, So she's just not that kind of person.
Well, she says it to her. The very first thing she said, our house's word is not, to be questioned. Mm-hmm. Like, we already have promised our daughters or our granddaughters to be wed to their brother-in-laws, basically. So it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. Well, again, kudos to Rhaenys. It seems like, Rhaenyra has taken a lot more of Rhaenys in terms of like, yeah, screw the existing patriarchy. I'm going to rule because that's the right thing. That is what has been, the realm has deemed worthy, has deemed the way to do things. And I'm not going to let the way of men keep me from what is mine, which I really admire. Now let's talk a little bit about the division in the Hightower house here. So we then a couple of scenes later see Alicent confront Otto about his schemes, and she calls him out honestly on everything what we've seen, because Otto's like, yeah, we've always been on the same page, we've been on the same team. What happened? And Alicent says, no, our hearts were never one. I was just another piece on the board. And that's when she brings up the line that you mentioned earlier. Amazing line, amazing moment for Olivia Cook and the character. Reluctance to murder is not a weakness. Can we say it again, people? Reluctance to murder is not a weakness.
For the people in the back.
Yeah, that was probably honestly my favorite line of maybe the whole season. I love that. I'm glad that she was the one to be able to deliver that.
Well, do we think, here's a question I have for you guys. Adam, I'll start with you. Does this conversation position Alicent more as the dominant player in the relationship moving forward, or are we looking at them as, even though they're on the same team, quote unquote, opposing opponents?
It's interesting, 'cause to a certain extent, they're on the same team for sure. Like, they want the same thing in the end. They want Aegon to be king, and they want that succession to start from him. But on the other hand, their tactics are so different. Different in, I guess, maybe their subtlety in a way, which is what we talked about earlier. But, Otto would go out swinging right now. He thinks he knows, like, the best bet here is to take people out and take them out quickly before we find out. We didn't even talk about it. They lock all the servants up earlier in the show
because they don't want them to spread the word
getting out.
Yeah.
So, like, he knows how important it is right now in this moment to strike, and Alicent's not about that. She's really ready to try and do this in a somewhat civilized way, I guess.
At least respectable to the people she's disrespecting.
And so, this line about the reluctance to murder is so fascinating because of what's to come. I think it's going to get very real very quickly.
Sounds great right now, doesn't it? Man, now you've got me really curious. But follow-up question though. Do you see them as more as equals, or is Alicent really taking the power and the lead here?
I think Alicent is for sure stepping out of the spotlight here. This is her kind of taking the reins of the Hightower household.
Because he even closes the scene by saying, "As you wish."
Yeah, she leaves him like with his own thoughts in a way, and I bet I can't think of it, but I bet it parallels a scene from probably earlier in the show. I mean, you think about him leaving her when he was dismissed as Hand. He leaves her out in the rain, standing there, having delivered a big truth bomb about like, hey, you're gonna have to play this game, or you're gonna end up, you and your sons will die. And that's kind of the mode she's been operating on ever since. And so to see her kind of be like, hey, I am playing the game. Here I am. Step back, kind of in a way. So,
well, this might be a conversation for another day. So, Daniel, we can bookmark this one. But I do find it really interesting that the Hightowers, like Alicent specifically, has operated under this belief that if Rhaenyra were to become queen, that her and her family would die. And then Otto's solution to when they have the power, his solution is to, kill them immediately. It's like, doth protest too much sort of thing.
I wonder why that's the assumed position.
Exactly. What does that tell you about your dad and how he views his relationships? Okay, so let's talk about the next scene with Alicent, where she reunites with her apparently ever loyal Larys Strong, who meets with her to share information regarding the spy network, the White Worm, in which Game of Thrones is like, you guys thought that we weren't doing weird sex stuff this season, but guess what?
JK.
Have we seen a foot fetish on this show yet? So we get this really weird scene where Larys, the more Alicent shows her feet and takes off whatever is covering her feet, the more information he divulges. And it's kind of icky, but hey, it's not, by Game of Thrones standards, I guess it could be worse. I will say, for me, the sexual favors does add a layer of transactional to this relationship that wasn't that clear to me.
It wasn't apparent.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys think this makes Larys more or less trustworthy, Daniel?
I don't think he's trustworthy. I don't know if this changes my opinion on his trustworthiness.
Maybe a better way to put it actually is where his loyalties lie.
Yeah, I don't think it does, because I think at the end of the day, we've seen that he's willing to do some very drastic things very quickly. And I don't know if she is enough to not move himself forward. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is motivating enough for him to stay committed to this transactional relationship. But I'm not convinced that. I mean, he's really simping hard if he's going to kill his entire family for some feet. I mean, I just that's pretty drastic. So I think there's got to be more to it than that.
Yeah, I assumed he had been obsessed with her. Like, I didn't know that they had developed this relationship. In fact, she sat down and she took her shoes off first. And I was like, wow, they've gotten very comfortable with each other. I just thought, just even that, just taking off her shoes, I was like, that's just not something the queen does in front of just anyone. And then she starts peeling off her stockings, and I was like, oh no, this is a feet thing.
And you can see, as he's talking, he's just staring at her feet. You're like, oh no, Tarantino has entered the chat. Oh no. I don't know. Adam, do you think this sort of reveal about the nature of the relationship, does this in any way put into question where his loyalties lie in the long game?
I think he is pretty firmly in Team Green here. I think, has made his reputation so far here within this court. And so he is more invested in keeping status quo here because he's been given power. He's been, given his family seat, Harrenhal. And so he would be more invested in keeping this ongoing. And so the transactional thing is really interesting because, I think at a moment's notice, Alicent could probably be like, done. I'm not doing this anymore. And I would feel like he would come back to try and reprove himself again. So I like the dynamic, though. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, the the guy with the messed up foot having a foot fetish is a little on the nose for me. But
I agree. Well,
I still thought it was funny.
And they even draw attention to, it's not even subtle.
did.
They're like, hey, here's a close up of him limping along right before the
So before this, there had been a little bit of speculation, book even, that he faked his limp. That was his, he had an injured foot as a child, but that the club foot itself was more of an exaggeration. And I think we've seen it before too. When he's pedaling along in the dungeons in that one scene, he's going at a pretty good clip and moving seemingly just fine. I kind of think his obsession with maybe Alicent's maybe so-called perfect feet probably confirms that he does indeed have a club foot there. So
I like the read. Enough with the foot fetish, although I feel like knowing Game of Thrones, Westerosi, this is probably the first of more scenes that we're going to see in the at least 4 seasons, according to George R. R. Martin, that we're going to get of this show. Let's move on to Aegon being named king. Really, I mean, the featured scene, the big moment of the episode. So, again, as we noted earlier, Sir Eryck is the one who smuggles Rhaenys out, and on their way out, she gets swept up in the crowds as they make their way to the king's coronation. And simultaneously, while Aegon and Alicent are in transit, they exchange their feelings about whether Viserys really wanted Aegon on the throne. And I think we've already hit on this pretty well in terms of the relationship between Aegon and his parents. The more important thing I want to hit on here is the coronation itself. Either of you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we've seen a coronation of this size in the world of Westeros. I mean, I know we did have the prologue that was set in Harrenhal that seemed pretty large, but none of the naming of the king in Game of Thrones, I think, was anywhere near this big. I just want to get you guys' impression of this before we get to the dragon in the room, your impression of this entire sequence, because it looked very expensive. Adam?
Yeah, I really loved it. They talk about it a lot in the books, both Game of Thrones and in House of the Dragon, about the tolling of the bells, the calling of the citizens to come to big events like this and to kind of experience it. I was really confused about like what was going to happen to Rhaenys until she catches a glimpse of the dragon pit and smiles, because that's where she was trying to get anyway.
Right.
But she realizes, oh, I'm headed there anyway, in a way. But I've always wanted to kind of see that. You get it a little bit in season 1. Arya gets called and is like buffeted along the streets until she makes it to Ned's beheading.
And that was on the steps of Baelor,
yes,
right?
Yeah. And so it's pretty cool to see just like this grand scale and like what it took to get people to come hear a very important message in a way. Like there's no loudspeaker, so this is how you do it. You have the city watch start pushing people along. So I liked it. The scene with Alicent and Aegon was really interesting to me. I just had she almost did you guys see a smile on her face when Aegon asked at the very end, like, did you guys love me?
Oh, yeah. Well, she was like,
you imbecile.
Yeah, like it was a sarcastic, like, are you stupid? Of course I love you. This is why I'm doing this thing.
Do you see what I'm doing here? Which was just such a nice, like, not nice, but it was a mom moment, you know? It was just like one of those where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, she does love him. Like, and maybe he felt that in that moment. It didn't seem like it because he still seemed pretty grim once he stepped on stage, but pretty interesting little conversation there, I thought.
Classic, I don't say classic, I don't want to over stereotype, but, not out of the realm of possibility for an extremely privileged kid who's about to have literally everything anyone could ever want handed to him,
right,
being like, do you really love me? Also speaks to just how sad he is to take this responsibility, which again, I think is worth empathizing with,
Yeah, we can know that he's a bad dude and also understand where, maybe his moral complexities come from, at least.
Absolutely. Daniel, what did you make of the coronation sequence?
Yeah, I agree that I don't think we've ever seen anything on this magnitude of just people. The only thing that I even thought of was actually Ned Stark's thing, where beheading, where not nearly the magnitude, but that's the only other time I can think where like massive amounts of people were coming to witness something. I couldn't think of any other, at least in King's Landing, any other event like like that. So yeah, it was definitely just the massive amount of people that were coming was crazy to see. Like I wouldn't have expected that many people to show up, but yeah, and then it was like you say, definitely looked expensive, and I don't even know if I've ever seen that many people. I don't know exactly how they did it. If like every single person in the crowd's like a real person, right? But like, or if there's some like CGI stuff going on, I have no idea. But I mean, it was. I don't even know if I've seen that many people in a room in anything ever. So just on that amount of spectacle was cool to see. And then the whole time you just have this slow building tension of, okay, like, is something going to happen here? Is something going to happen here? Like, what's going to happen here? Like, something's got to happen here. So I did like the tension that was being built. Obviously, you see, it was weird. Like, even though I saw Rhaenys sort of like dip out, when we get to like the moment, in that moment, I wasn't even thinking of her. Like, I had already sort of like gotten like swept up in the moment, and I was like, oh, duh, that like before they reveal her, I kind of figured out who it was, but it was like even in that moment, I was like, wait, did Rhaenyra or Daemon find out? Are they coming to like attack? Like, is this like I was in that, like I had gotten so swept up in the moment of like what is going to happen, and then that tension that like I sort of got lost in it, which I think is a good thing. So yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to how the great execution. Just a few things I want to note. Firstly, Daniel, if I were guessing, I don't know this, my guess is they probably had a pretty decent number of extras in the room that they then CGI duplicated them to make it look bigger.
That's what I always assume.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
You could actually, there was some pretty good crowd acting from the first few rows. I rewatched it a little bit, and I was like noticing different people doing different things, because the initial reaction of them, they trot Otto out here to kind of be like, we are so sad, but it's also a good day. And so like you'd see different people in the crowd giving like the what the hell kind of reaction.
It's not they're all giving a singular reaction.
Right.
Like there's not a sign that says clap.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
From Shrek.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And my thinking is one. Firstly, Otto Hightower. He's probably been working on those dulcet tones. You gotta, like you said, there's no megaphones. He's got to really project in this large room.
He's got a good stage voice.
Number two, fun little tidbit. I've picked up on, of course, we've mentioned, Daniel, previously in the season, how they've mixed in little musical themes from Game of Thrones into the show, mostly Targaryen related themes. Although last episode, we got a little bit of the King's Road whenever Viserys was walking up to the throne in his final time on the throne, and we get it again here. We get it. What most interesting to me, just a little, I'm gonna nerd out about the music here for a second. We hear the King's Road theme again, both diegetically, which means it is in the fiction when they're playing the horns. It's not one for one, but it's the same tune. The dun 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 dun. It's a thing that is also used in the score. I don't know. Super fun thing.
I love that. I didn't pay attention to that at all, but I love musical cues like that, because you can tell a whole lot about what they want you to think based on the musical cues. So that's awesome.
Well, in fact that like the music that we hear as the viewers also exist within the fiction just is kind of funny. It's like I remember the movie Solo, for example, was the first time to ever utilize the any sort of Star Wars music diegetically, because the music and the ads for the join the Imperials was the Imperial theme. Dumb stuff like that, but you're like, oh, well, in the fiction they hear the same thing we hear, except for we hear it on a grander scale. So anyway, just like to geek out about that. But yeah, I thought this was a cool sequence. I think the only other thing I could think of that was even close to this big probably would have been the dragon pits in Marine season 5. Again, I think that one was tough, though, because it was mostly people seated in an audience, not a giant crowd of people standing. And then if you have the battle between the Viper and the Mountain was really a small...
That was pretty small.
Small group.
The only one I was going to say, in the books, Joffrey and Marjorie's wedding is a huge deal.
Right. Yeah.
But it is done in the Sept of Baelor, which is a smaller thing by far, but still pretty big. But they had, kind of as they did, they had, coronation parade almost. So like the whole of King's Landing would have turned out for that moment, especially because Marjorie was so beloved by the people.
Right.
And then their party after was huge. So that'd be one thing I would say, but not as big as this.
As you were talking too, I thought about like the shame walk too was another one where a lot of people showed up to watch that. But again, just the
and participate.
Yeah.
Anytime they can throw cow pies.
But just the sheer number of people in a singular location, like this is probably the biggest.
Yeah, this was crazy big.
Yeah. So again, that's they're flexing that $20 million budgeted per episode. Again, if I read correctly, it's $200 million budget for the whole season. 10 episodes, average of $20 million an episode. So it's got to go somewhere.
It's paying off. I like it. So
they're not matching the Bezos bucks of whatever it was, $300 million or whatever for the first season. But all right. Well, with all that said, though, let's talk about this. It sounds like we were all surprised by Rhaenys jumping through the floor to varying degrees. Daniel was bewildered because he was like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm sitting here thinking, "Oh, all right, that's the beast beneath the boards. Here's that payoff." And Adam, you said you kind of figured it out just before.
Yeah, when she dipped down into, I knew they were in the dragon pit, and so when she dipped downstairs, I was like, "Okay, we're about to see this. I don't know in what form or function." And again, still a little confused about being able to bust through a floor, but we'll move past that. Pretty incredible moment though. I mean, this is why people love the show, I think, and why they liked Game of Thrones, up until about 8.5 seasons in, I'd say. It's just like these big spectacle moments are so, like, they dip into the huge fantasy aspect of the show, as well as kind of these power play moves. Also, just like a badass woman on top of a dragon, flexing a little bit. You gotta love it. That armor she's wearing is incredible. Awesome. It's so cool looking. It's like the Targaryen red and black, and I don't know, up until this point we saw Daemon in armor while riding a dragon, and I can't remember anyone else so far.
I think we saw Lenore.
Oh, yeah.
And very briefly, like before we even realized that's who it was, we saw him riding a dragon.
That's
right.
And
that one in episode 3, I think it was. No, not a lot of dragon rider armor, which again, I know we're going to get so much more of that in the future. Can't wait. But it is some pretty badass armor. I will say, I know I said at the top, amazing moment in the as you're experiencing, like, holy shit. It did recreate that feeling of like, what's going to happen?
Yep.
You're watching the coronation. The bottom's going to fall out somewhere. You don't know where it's going to come from. And then when Rhaenyra is on the dragon in front of them, you're like, well, she's going to roast them because obviously. Also,
Rhaenys, but
Rhaenys, yeah. Sorry, who did I say? Rhaenyra?
Yeah.
Sorry, I said correction. Rhaenyra is going to roast them.
Yeah.
And she doesn't. Now, I think they did it's a really good thing. Those actresses had incredible chemistry.
I think that's the one that sells it. Yeah.
It just pushes it over for me because it's one of those in the moment I bought it, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I don't know. Rhaenys is pretty aggressive, take charge, but they had done the legwork earlier in that episode and on Rhaenys throughout the season to show that while she is willing to fight, she also has a soft spot for family and is a mother as well. Daniel, but you said you were sort of disappointed that this wasn't like a paradigm shift. I mean, overall, would you say the sequence worked for you, or do you feel like maybe the writers overplayed it a little bit?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do think the moment worked, and I think that you guys are right. Like, if that scene between the two of them wasn't there, like, it would not have worked. But I think the scene does enough to make me like say, okay, I can buy this, and not that I'm like 100% all in. Like, it totally makes sense that she doesn't burn them right away. But I can okay, I can believe that. But again, like you said, that scene is doing all the heavy lifting. And also their performances are doing a lot of the heavy lifting as well. Yes. If the performances weren't as strong as they were, it'd be a lot harder to believe. That being said, I also think that there's just, like I said, I haven't read the books, but like there's probably a little bit of plot armor we need these characters to continue on. So then that begs the question, okay, so like, did she have to come up in this way? Obviously it's a cool spectacle, but kind of like what you guys were saying earlier, like maybe we just see her like come out and fly away, like doesn't take the time to stay in there, right? But you know, is it worth it for this like epic moment? I'm willing to say yes, because of that scene and how much, you know, we're able to get to see that they do have a level of respect for each other. But I can also completely understand if someone was like, it doesn't buy it either. I think you can kind of go both ways.
Yeah, even despite the fact that I think she believes what they're doing is wrong.
Oh, yeah.
It has yet to get to that level yet, even of like, it's time to kill people. Like she would be sending off the first salvo of like, I'm going to kill an entire family here, including maybe someone who's just crowned as king, which is regicide. But even beyond that, kinslaying is considered to be one of the ultimate sins of Westeros in a way. And you hear back in Game of Thrones, even here, people that take down their own family are branded for life. And so what if she does it and then everyone rebels against her even? So I think there are factors to be considered there. I did wonder too, just how much her, this whole season, she's been pretty much right down the middle. She didn't want to sway to one side or the other. So maybe she thought, I'm just going to get out of here. Like I'll bust up through the floor, make a cool moment, and then get out of here. Interestingly, she probably killed a couple hundred people.
Oh, easily.
Just in the process of doing that.
But those are common people.
Those are the small folk, you know? And so...
this is why Visery is such an important character. She's got to fight for those guys so they don't get slayed by dragons busting out of floors.
Honestly, that I do believe something like this scene could be used in following seasons as like a... I know they don't do flashback scenes, but I wouldn't be surprised if some character down the road is like motivated by the death of a family member in that moment, or, you know, something like that, where they could use this to actually have more purpose down the road. Because, the saying, I think, from Game of Thrones and maybe even from earlier than that, I can't remember, but like the small folk pay the largest price when the High Lords play the Game of Thrones. You know, it's kind of almost the theme of these books in general, and kind of really touches on George R. R. Martin's, thoughts on war as a whole, I think. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I do hope they pay it off. I especially if we are going to be considering the impacts of what the royal ruling class, their decisions and their squabbles have on the everyday person. I do think that's worth considering. Hey, a lot of people just died, and
right.
Are we just going to act like it didn't happen? What about their families? Is there not going to be one of them that goes to become a faceless man assassin? You know, like it's just,
something.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely more room in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire in general to explore some of these other storylines that people are going to have. I mean, there's bound to be dozens of them, that you could think of just off, like a spy that goes on to, figure out how to murder people, something like that, or just a person in general who's so upset at seeing this that they lead a rebellion, something like that.
Which comes back to why Caleb is a huge Peter Baelish fan. Despite being a truly awful, evil at his core person, he's a person who comes from nothing, and his whole goal is to say, screw you people, I'm gonna be on top. Because he was, I guess technically his family had lands, the Fingers, but he was basically nobody.
They were nothing,
right?
So,
which is why, again, people always ask, why do you like Littlefinger so much? I'm like, well, he is awful. Let's just get that out of the way. But also, he represents this group of, someone who plays the game. He sees what it takes to move up and to take power and to seize it to his own means, and he's willing to be patient and work for it.
There's few lawful good characters in this universe.
Oh, no.
Very
few.
There's not too many, and the ones that are even kind of frustrating. So
listen,
come on, Ned Stark, get it together, man.
I got one for you. His name was Lord Beesbury.
He definitely tried. He was like, I'm gonna stand on my laurels here, y'all. Yeah. So
he went out on his morals, but
went out on his face.
Bringing back to Rhaenys, though, I will say my biggest takeaway, though, removing our question about, how did, will this have an impact? Should she have, should have, would have, could have? It definitely sends a signal. Rhaenys is, don't mess with Rhaenys. She's like, I'm going to give you this moment just so you can witness me and what I'm capable of doing. Remember this moment, I don't know where she's going to end up in the grand scheme of things. But I think you raised a great point I hadn't considered, Adam, which is there hasn't technically been an act of war yet. And she would be the first one to strike. I do wonder if she knew the conversations Otto was having, if she might have done things differently, but she does not have that knowledge. We as the audience do. She does not. So she's thinking what they're doing is wrong, but also, am I going to murder for it? It's good. It's a good point.
It gives the hesitation. I think that's plausible enough. And again, her conversation with Alicent, I think, they have a respect for each other.
Yeah,
so
definitely. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our recap of the show. Now for a couple of quick predictions before we select this week's winner, loser, and wild card player. I don't know. I just want to hear what you guys. I guess, Adam, maybe this removes you from this question a bit. Daniel, how do you expect Rhaenyra and Daemon will reposition themselves after they discover that Rhaenyra has been usurped?
I think we have seen how Daemon responds to getting information that he does not like. And so I think it's
hate to be that messenger.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is probably going to be some of the worst information he will be receiving, and he will respond with violence. And so I think we are pretty much, we've been saying this the whole season. We're ready. I think civil war is coming, and I think especially Daemon and Rhaenyra too, but more so Daemon. Are going to be preparing to, fight a war. And that's where that, Aemon getting that dragon becomes so important. And the biggest dragon. And we'll get to see how that, we've heard the phrase, a dance with dragons, right? So that's what's coming. I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
And I'll go. It's not just a phrase. That is actually what the Civil War is called.
Right.
It is literally called the Dance of Dragons. So it is.
I think it's actually said in the very first episode, and this isn't much of a spoiler, but I think I can get away with it. In the very first episode, in the narration of the Grand Council that elects Viserys instead of Rhaenys, they say it's a dance of dragons, but it was more accurately described as the death of the dragons. Mm-hmm. So that's probably a good enough example of what's coming up. So
spoilers, there aren't dragons in Game of Thrones because they're all dead.
Basically.
So, I wonder what caused that. I don't know. Well, all right. Well, gentlemen, we're going to conclude this week's episode, as we always do, by selecting this week's winner, this week's loser, and this week's biggest wild card player. Daniel Stoll, I'll start with you this week.
For me, I actually had a more difficult time choosing this week than I normally do. But so for the week's winner, I chose Aegon. I mean, he becomes the king, right? Like, he is now the holder of all power. I think behind that Aegon, you could sort of say like Otto / Alicent, because maybe he's going to listen to him, but also maybe he's not. We don't really know. So I think Aegon is the big winner, and he seemed to really enjoy the praise that he was getting from the crowd. So that may go to his head very quickly as a young person. So yeah, he's the winner for me. The losers are, I'm going to say 2 and 1, Daemon and Rhaenyra. They were not there and present to be able to respond to this quickly, and have lost a lot of power. And there are now people plotting to assassinate them. So they're losers in the short term. A long term, I don't know, but short term, they're in a tough spot right now. They're going to have to respond quickly. The wild card, Mysaria, is what I'm going with. The White Worm. I just don't know where she's going and what her overall plan is, and so that makes her a wild card for me. And then for the special, we've joked about it a little bit, but for this week's special award, I went with the tamest dragon award goes to Rhaenys and her dragon because they gave out a pretty big roar, but that was it. We could have seen some more fire, I think. But so Tamus Dragon, I think, is for this week's episode.
It's all bark, no bite. Daniel, I don't know. Have you seen The Boys on Amazon?
I've not seen The Boys.
I've only seen season 1.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to spoil that show. I just know that there is an iconic sequence that has been memed in which Homelander, who is like the evil Superman,
starts smiling.
Yeah, he just starts, he does something terrible. I won't say what it is or what it means, but he does something terrible and the crowd starts cheering for him and he just is like, wait, what? And he just starts, because he's very worried about his perception.
He's got an image.
He's got an image. That's literally his weakness, honestly, is how people perceive him. So at first he's like mortified that he just did this awful thing in public specifically. But then when people crowd, he starts to like laugh and like raise his hands and stuff. Anyway, if you're on Twitter, too much like I am.
I've seen the GIF.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. This Aegon was definitely the Homelander gift this week. Adam, who are your picks for the week?
Let's see. Winner for me, it's tough because I think for 98% of the episode, it's Alicent. I think she gets to play the game better than anyone this. She gets her wishes. No assassins are sent out just yet, anyway. Her son is he's found, first of all, by her side. Well, returned by her side.
Right.
And she gets to put her dad in place. But then Rhaenys kind of delivers the final blow there at the very last second. So I'll go Rhaenys as my winner.
Very nice.
I think she punctuates the episode and kind of really makes it her own there at the end. So loser, I'm going to go Otto Hightower. I think kind of lost it all the way around this time. Got kind of called out by his own daughter in the council meeting. His plan did not go off. He lost the fight to find Aegon. So lots of L's for my man Otto.
Foiled again.
Foiled again. Wild card. Man. I'm gonna go Aemond.
Yeah.
I think he laid it out there exactly why he's a wild card. He has ambition. He is ready to strike. He would have been ready for the call. And I think it's going to be interesting. I think he will definitely make the most waves coming up. So
exciting. So exciting. He is Daemon 2.0.
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm going to go this week's winner. I'm going to go Team Alicent here because to your point, while Rhaenys does get the final kind of exclamation point or period of no one's touching me, Alicent pretty much outplays everyone else in this episode pretty well. And Rhaenys just barely got out, only because Eryck had a conscience, apparently. Mm-hmm. This week's loser? I'm going to go all those lords who stuck to their guns and were like, no, we swore an oath to Rhaenyra. This is clearly very fishy. I don't like this plan. And even the guy who was quiet, like, yeah, I'll bend the knee, I'll bend the beam, tries to get out as fast as possible. They all got strung up. Not great. Not great.
Not good.
Wild card. I'm going to say Rhaenyra. I mean, again, while I do think she's generally been neutral, the way they've, mostly with the imagery and the way that the families have paired up, I've always sort of more closely associated her with Team Daemon Rhaenyra, or the Blacks, as we will learn. I guess that's a slight spoiler. The Blacks.
They've kind of already identified themselves a little bit that way.
A little bit. Yeah. But again, the title for the next episode is The Black Queen. So, more to come there. But, she's generally, I think my perception is she's been leaning towards their direction while also not getting too involved in the small squabbles. I think she's the wild card. My guess is she's probably going to go black. However, maybe her and Corlys decide to play neutral. And
Corlys's corpse.
Hey, man, we haven't seen the body yet.
That's true.
So, I'm assuming he's still around. I don't know. But either way, she and Driftmark, maybe they decide to play neutral and don't get involved in the Civil War, which that decision, I think, would sway the balance of power pretty significantly, as we saw in this episode. So I'm gonna call her out for the wild card. This week's special award is the 2-for-1 special. Arryk. I know I'm gonna keep making fun of this, but listen, this is great. I love that I love the trope of twins who are fighting with each other, and I didn't know these characters existed until this episode. So
I don't think they did.
I think that one of them. Okay, so I saw that there was a nod in the last episode. I think it was Otto.
Maybe when they're in the yard, or
it was somebody, I can't remember. Someone in the last episode saw one of them. I don't remember which one, and said, called him the wrong one.
Oh, that's right.
And just said, "Oh, I got you confused with your brother." But I didn't know that they were literally twins. I thought it was, they might just look kind of alike,
right,
or whatever. No, I didn't realize their names were so similar or that they were twins. It's a goofy trope. I love it. 2-for-1 special. It's going to be interesting to see if the twins end up on opposite sides here.
Can I do one thing there and talk about just one little extra? Is the Kingsguard is so interesting to me because it, like, you think of them as a representative of this is the king, this is who protects them, but they're individual people, and they have a split in their faction, and it's going to be some fun stuff, I think, coming forward. So
cannot wait. See, that's the things you don't think about. I love it. I'm excited, and we did see that a little bit here.
Yeah, Lord Harold Westerling resigns.
He says, until there's a king in place, I'm out, and something tells me he's not coming back.
And he was pretty smart to not really declare a side there, I feel like. He said, I'm just going to wait it out here. So,
ooh, but maybe. I mean, we did see in that very first episode, he was there with Rhaenyra when her dragon landed. So, again, I don't know this, but my hunch is he's going to come back, Team Rhaenyra. So we'll see. All right. Well, gentlemen, it's been so much fun talking this week's episode of House of the Dragon, The Green Council. With all that said, I would love to give our listeners an opportunity to know where they can keep up with you and all the things you do, whether it be online, offline. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
This was awesome. I had so much fun.
Awesome. So where can our listeners follow you online?
Yeah, I am, like we kind of talked about at the very beginning of the show, I'm a journalist. I work for PBS NewsHour, but I cover Oklahoma and Oklahoma-related news. So just follow me on the Twitter sphere. I'm Adam_WK. That's really about it. And even there, I mostly just share links to my stories. If you want to hit me up, email or anything like that, that's all there. So
fantastic.
Read my stories too. They're good, I promise.
Can attest also your appearances on the, you appear from time to time in segments?
On the broadcast, yeah.
That's really cool.
It's quite fun.
Nice. Daniel Stahl, where can people keep up with you?
I'd still love to hear everybody's, reviews. So I'll always keep sending those in. That's always awesome. And then, of course, you can always follow me on Twitter, Daniel Stahl23.
And, of course, you can find me tweeting about mostly film and television, sometimes video games, at C Masters Talk. That's letter C, Masters Talk. Maybe some politics this election season. I don't know. I try to stay away from that generally on the internet at this point. Different conversation. But, just be warned, there might be some political content around election season. You can also keep up with all of the things, the Cast Beyond the Wall, on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Cast Beyond the Wall, or you can hit us up on Twitter at @cast_beyond_GOT. But like I said, really the best way to support us, as Daniel said, is to leave us that rating and review. You can also email us, like Jamie Russell, at castbeyondthewall@live.com. If you need that spelled out, it's also in the show notes for this podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone, to this week's recap of House of the Dragon. Join us next week when we continue to go beyond the wall in the Season 1 finale of House of the Dragon. And until then, always be watching for the beast beneath the boards.